Thank you, Timo and panelists, for the nice discussion. And now I would like to invite the last speaker, not least, of course, Dr. Ariel Cohen. And he will wrap up entire Vilnius Security Forum. So for the final speech, and Dr. Ariel Cohen is a recognized authority in political risk, international energy and security. He is founding principal of international market analysis, a boutique consulting firm dealing with geoeconomic, geostrategic energy and natural resources. He is also internationally recognized expert on Russia, Eurasia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. So, Mr. Cohen, floor is yours.
So I want to thank the organizers, and particularly Timo Hillenberg, my good friend for many, many years. Timo, thank you. I would like to try to sort of take a step back and up and look at it in a historic and strategic perspective, both geostrategic and geoeconomic. What we have now is a countdown. We do not 100% sure if the countdown is for a military operation or for a negotiated outcome. I think Putin is preparing for both. And I think that while initially a lot of people thought, and including myself, that he is backing up his diplomatic demands with a credible threat of force, the fast drop of the bond rates in Moscow and of the stock market in Moscow suggests that there may be some insider knowledge that they are going towards a military operation. However, having said that, creating this panic also allows the Kremlin insiders to short the market, to sell market down and then pick it up. Now it's 25% below the October highs. So we should not discount the economic side of this complicated, expensive, and sophisticated psychological operation that backs up the Russian strategic demands to re-engineer the security balance in Europe. And I repeat, the purpose of what we are watching here, this tanks moving to the border, Belarus, etc., is not just grabbing a piece of Ukrainian territory, although I will talk about my experiences and information I gathered in my trips to Russia. Before COVID, I used to go there a couple of times a year. I spoke at their defense ministry conferences a couple of times and talked to a bunch of Russian policy wonks. The purpose of this exercise is to recognize that having moved from the post-Soviet collapse, having built an authoritarian state and investing, as the Russian tradition always is, a lot of money into the military-industrial complex and military technology, the relative balance of power in Europe has changed over the last 20 years. And it changed in the way we've seen over history several times. Russia would come from a weak position, falling behind in technology, to a political reform that consolidates the state, sometimes over-consolidates it, over-centralizes it, and modernizes the military. If you look at the vector of Russian policy, starting with Ivan III, the early 16th century, the grandfather of Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, was consolidating the state, taking Pskov and Novgorod, especially Novgorod, and then this would slow down, and then his great grandson, Ivan the Terrible, would re-centralize, create a horrible, oppressive, brutal dictatorship, create a separate state within Oprichnina, the first secret service state in Russia, 300 or 400 years before Stalin. And then successfully taking Kazan and Astrakhan, and then moving into the areas we are discussing now, into Lithuania, fighting Lithuania and Sweden, trying to gain access to the Baltic Sea, and then failing. Not only Ivan the Terrible failed in that war, the Livonian War, he failed the Russian state to the point that it collapsed. So when I plot this line of hyper-centralization and collapse, that's the first episode. Then comes the time of troubles, the Polish invasion, the Polish retreat, and then this march of Russia into Ukraine in the 17th century, and then under Alexei, and then into the Baltic states under Peter the Great, begins again. Peter the Great again reforms the state and modernizes the military. Then it continues pretty much in a straight line. The divisions of Poland under Catherine, the defeats of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire under Peter and Catherine, and then into the 19th century. So Russia pushes west, north, and southwest against the Ottoman Empire. And then in the late 19th century, they start pushing into Central Asia. After the defeat in World War I, the state collapses again. There's a civil war. They lose the Baltic states. They lose Poland. They lose Finland. Timo should be happy. Otherwise, his name would be Timofey Ivanovich. Then the Soviet Union re-centralizes, builds the police state, and the Soviet Union expands and expands, and then it collapses again. So you have 3 cycles of expansion, re-centralization, and collapse, and after each cycle, Russia expands. In 1993 and 96, when I was publishing my book, Russian Imperialism, I asked the question, Russia has an option of building a national democratic republic or rebuilding the empire. I think we have the answer now. After 30 years, I think it's time for me to write another book, Russian Empire, the Comeback Kid, or something like that. So what does it all mean for us? It means that Ukraine is just one theater. It's not the only theater. It means that if the West collectively is going to lose Ukraine, and Russia either invades or destabilizes, destroys the Ukrainian state, it means that the next front is going to be Poland, the Baltic states, possibly Finland and Sweden. That pressure will not stop until Russia sort of learns the lesson and says we need to be a status quo power, not an anti-status quo power as it is now. In that respect, as we know, the centerpiece of Russian economy is oil and gas. And in that respect, I would like to say a few words about what we see in that area. The European energy policy, and particularly the German energy policy, for several years now emphasized the renewables. I'm all in favor of clean air. I'm all in favor of fighting global warming. I'm all in favor of economically effective solar and wind. However, what the Germans did by killing nuclear and by increasing their dependence, not just on natural gas, on Russian natural gas, and expanding their dependence on Nord Stream 2, influences the balance of power in Europe through a geoeconomic means of energy dependency and increasing Russian revenue from the European energy purchases. And the United States tried in a very awkward, in a very heavy-handed manner under Trump to change that, to bring it to Germans' attention, unsuccessfully. Comes Joe Biden and gives a green light to Nord Stream 2. At the same time, since 2014, United States, UK, and others were sort of knocking on Germans' doors, asking, begging, pleading to increase the allocation of their GDP to at least 2% for the military. We failed. Then we said, okay, not just the military allocation, the military infrastructure allocation. And the military infrastructure allocation would include bridges, ports, roads, railroads, to allow the infrastructure to be built, that when we have a situation in which NATO members are threatened, the United States can bring its troops to Europe, including to German ports, and push the forces to the eastern border. We failed. Then in May, when the Biden administration made a deal with Merkel that we will lift our objections to Nord Stream 2 and allow Germany to increase its dependence on Russian gas. If Russia attacks Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 goes off the table. What happened now? Chancellor Scholz declared that Nord Stream 2 and gas are a part of private sector issues, and the German government should not interfere with that. In addition to that, in SWIFT sanctions, the discussion of SWIFT sanctions, the Europeans pushed against unplugging Russia from SWIFT if Russia invades Ukraine. So in a way, I could interpret, I'm not saying that's how Russia interprets it, but I could interpret it as Putin saying, okay, so if I go and smash the china in the kitchen, mom will still give me lunch and dinner. I will still earn these billions and billions of dollars that I earned from Nord Stream 2, and I will still be able to do business. I will not be in the position of Iran that was unplugged from SWIFT and suffered as a result. And even then, by the way, that was not sufficient. That regime continues doing what it's doing. You just saw the other day, the Houthi proxy of Iran shot missiles at UAE, and as a result, the Saudis bombed Sana'a, and that did not change the Iranian behavior. The purpose of the sanctions is to change the behavior, and in order to change foreign policy and security behavior, the sanctions need to be very, very powerful. We are not there yet. Furthermore, in addition to Ukraine, I would mention the Black Sea Basin and Georgia as a southern flank of this confrontation, and what are we doing there? In the southern flank, Turkey is playing a very interesting game. It's on the one hand, distances itself from NATO, talking to Russia. They bought S-400s, they want to buy possibly Russian fighter jets, but at the same time, Turkey pursues an independent policy in the Caucasus. We saw it in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. There was no escalation, meaningful escalation between Ankara and Moscow there. And now Turkey is poking its finger somewhere which is very sensitive for Russia by supplying the Bayraktar drones to Ukraine and expanding the Turkish-Ukrainian military cooperation and trying to play a mediating role, which, by the way, I will go on a limb and say that Turkey will fail. The only country that is capable of bringing Russia and Ukraine together is not Turkey, it's the United States. And I'm not even sure Russia is willing to do that without getting very deep concessions along the Minsk process implementation in the Russian interpretation. Another point I want to make is that, there is a humoristic book that the Russian speakers in the audience know by Ilf and Petrov, the Golden Calf, Zolotoy Telenok, and the 12 Chairs. And it's funny. It has all kinds of funny expressions. And one of them is the saving of a drowning man is a handiwork of a drowning man. In order to save somebody, that person needs to save themselves. Спасение утопающих – дело рук самих утопающих. And in that respect, I have to say something about Ukraine. I love Ukraine. I was born in Ukraine. Majority of my family the 3 out of my 4 grandparents come from Ukraine, and my 4th grandparent, my grandfather, comes from Lithuania. So I sort of have 2 legs in both camps. Ukrainians have a tremendous defense and military potential. And instead of going to Germans and asking for German weapons, which they did not receive, which is again a signal to Putin where Germany stands, and signal to us, by the way, in terms of our alliance. Ukrainians had at least 8 years since 2014, if not 30 years since independence, to build up their own military-industrial complex. For God's sake, in the Soviet era, the Ukrainians were the builders of the Soviet ICBM force in the Yuzhmash plant. If they could build ICBMs, of course, they can build medium-range rockets that would come very handy as a deterrence. They still have 50% of the energy manufactured, produced in nuclear plants that they didn't shut down. They're not in good shape. They're kind of getting old and rickety. But nevertheless, that nuclear expertise is there. They produce tanks. They produce small arms and weapons. There is no reason why Ukrainians should not create these jobs for themselves and build their own weapons for their own defense. But weapons is not enough. The Ukrainians need Russia to be deterred not just by resistance that we read about, how Ukrainian military is so much stronger since 2014, which it may be. The question is, what is the strategic coordination and command level? I'm sure that on the battalion level, they're much better than in 2014. Maybe on the regiment level. I have questions about the division level and up. And the main thing is the reserves that are not there, that are not trained. There's no doctrine. There's no storage of weapons. And all these people who were serving since 2014, in my view, need to be called in every year for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depends on the unit. Trained every year, know where they go, and their commanders have to have a very good level of coordination. I am not talking about territorial defense. I had lunch yesterday with a group of high-level Ukrainians here in Washington. And they said, yeah, we just passed the law. First of all, you're in a war situation for 6 years. Why did you pass the law just now? And secondly, they said, nobody knows what to do with these people. They will be responsible on a city level. And this territorial defense will be, as the word goes, for that territory, which may even increase the centrifugal forces in Ukraine. So the Kharkiv people will report to Kharkiv and the Lviv people will report to Lviv instead of having it under the general staff with a military strategy for the reserves. What do they do, how they do it, and equipping them for anti-air, anti-tank, etc. warfare. I loved what Thomas said about the cyber draft in Estonia. Ukraine already suffered from a cyber attack. They are not fully protected, my Ukrainian sources are telling me, and they do have a pretty good cyber industry, and they needed to build it up along the Estonian, US, Israeli, and other lines where there's a close cooperation between the military and the cyber. You mentioned the cyber recruitment in Estonia. I can tell you that probably the majority of Israeli startups in the cyber area come from the unit called 8200, 8200. And these are military guys and gals who are recruited early, talent spotted, put in training, then they serve, and then they go out and start these startups, and that system works quite well. Thank you very much. And finally, we do have a structural challenge, and I'll probably stop after that. And the structural challenge is that we still don't have a buy-in in Europe from what America considers the main European security partners. You notice that the group that Biden talked to on Ukraine is UK. I understand, close ally, etc. Although, you know, they're so preoccupied with the drinking that was going on in the prime minister's office, they kind of missed the rest of the security challenges, which are much more serious than that. The Germans, I spoke already too much about the Germans, won't make me popular in Berlin. The French, who do not consider Russia a threat and actually consider Russia a balance against Germany potentially. Talked enough with the French and also studied enough French-Russian relations over the last 150 years. And the Italians. And I will not spend any money talking about the Italian security role in the Ukrainian conflict because there's none. So if we do not address the coherence, and maybe, just maybe, the Nordic and Central European countries can be more active, proactive in NATO, in the EU, etc. If we do not achieve coherence in Europe, we will be at a huge strategic disadvantage vis-a-vis Russia. Why? Because the US is really focusing now on China. We, in small, closed-door forums, told our German colleagues at the Loisac Group, at the Marshall Center in Garmisch and elsewhere, many, many times, this is coming. The Chinese challenge is not going away. It's going to get only worse. The nightmare scenario for me, I have it in my recent article in The Hill, probably, a week ago, the article called Putin's One-Two-Punch European Strategy to Defeat America in The Hill, where I say that the nightmare scenario for us is a simultaneous Chinese attack on Taiwan and Russian attack on Ukraine. And even smaller scope attacks, like trying to take a corridor from the Crimea to the Dnieper to get water, or as I said before, as I've heard in Moscow many times, a two-prong attack. One is from Belarus to Kiev, and also from east to west, Kharkiv, Kiev, and in the south, from Mariupol to Melitopol, to Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa in the south, taking all of what they call Novorossiya and cutting Ukraine off from the Black Sea and leaving a rump Ukraine in the west that would resist. I mean, the one place in Ukraine that would really resist is the Carpathian Mountains and the west. That is a maximum program, but it could be something smaller than that. It could be at some point NATO and Washington would try to make some kind of a deal, but it doesn't look that way yet. So we are in a pretty prolonged period. I do not think Putin will endanger his relationship with Xi Jinping and attack before the Beijing Olympics. I understand the opening is on February 4th. So probably second half of February and early March will be a crucial period. And maybe there will be no attack. Maybe, ideally, both sides will declare victory, declare some achievements like limitation of military maneuvers, limitation of offensive weapon deployments, and just go home. I think the probability of that is 30% or less. So we need to prepare for the worst. And if we're not cohesive, if we're not on the same page, and here, by the way, I must tip my hat to the Nordic countries. They are much, much ahead than, let's say, Germany and France. If we don't do that, as they say in English, if we don't stick together, we'll hang separately. And I don't want us to hang separately. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.